Week 3, Wednesday night. The kind of cold that turned breath into fog and made snow crunch like broken glass underfoot. James Williams ran across the yard with his daughter limp in his arms, her lips pale blue, her chest still. The ambulance sat in his driveway, red lights carving the darkness into pieces, and the paramedic met him halfway with equipment James didn't want to understand. They laid Rachel on the stretcher. Her small body looked impossibly fragile against the white sheet. The paramedic pressed the paddles to her chest. Her body arched once, twice. On the third shock, her heart started again. James climbed into the ambulance beside her. Patricia Ashford followed without asking permission, her wool coat over pajamas, snow melting in her dark hair. She'd been staying at the farm for 17 days. She gripped James's hand as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens split the night open. Dr. Martinez met them at Mapleton Regional Hospital. He was a short man with gray hair and kind eyes that couldn't hide the truth. He pulled James into the hallway while nurses wheeled Rachel toward the intensive care unit. Patricia stood against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, watching through the window as they hooked Rachel to monitors. Dr. Martinez didn't soften it. She needs the second surgery now, tonight. Her heart is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The valve replacement can't wait another month. James felt the floor tilt beneath him. How much? $180,000. Insurance covers $80,000. The number landed like a fist. James had $43,000 in savings. The farm was paid off, but mortgaging it would take weeks. Rachel didn't have weeks. She didn't have days. "Daddy?" Rachel's voice came thin through the open door. James turned and saw her looking at him, oxygen mask fogging with each breath. "Am I gonna die like Mama?" James walked to her bedside and took her hand. Her pulse fluttered against his thumb like a trapped bird. "No, baby, I won't let that happen, I promise." Patricia stood in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She'd never seen James afraid before. In 3 weeks on the farm, she'd seen him calm through winter storms, patient with Rachel's nightmares, steady when the furnace broke and the house dropped to 40 degrees overnight. But now his hands shook as he smoothed Rachel's hair back from her forehead. Dr. Martinez looked at Patricia, then at James. "I'll give you some time, but we need to make a decision within the hour." The hour stretched and compressed. Rachel fell asleep from exhaustion. James sat beside her bed, watching the monitors, counting each heartbeat like a miser counting coins. Patricia sat across from him in the plastic chair meant for visitors, her knees pulled to her chest, still wearing the pajamas she'd thrown on when James pounded on her door 20 minutes ago, shouting that Rachel wasn't breathing. James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I'll sell the farm." Patricia shook her head. "That'll take months. She doesn't have months." "Then I don't know what to do." Patricia stood and walked to the window. Mapleton spread out below them, a small town drowning in snow, streetlights barely visible through the storm. She'd come here 24 days ago in heels and a business suit, carrying a contract, and enough arrogance to think she could negotiate her way through a stranger's life. She'd come because her father's will demanded a husband before her 33rd birthday, or she'd lose the company he'd spent 40 years building. She'd come with money and desperation and a background check that told her James Williams was perfect for what she needed, isolated, principled, impossible to corrupt, because he'd already given up everything that mattered for love once before. She'd come expecting a transaction. She'd found a family instead. Patricia turned from the window. "Marry me." James looked up, his eyes red. "What?" "Marry me. Right now. Tonight. The contract I offered you 24 days ago still stands. $250,000 for 12 months. Except we skip the 12 months and make it real. I cover Rachel's surgery as family. You get what you need. I get what I need. Everyone wins." James stood slowly. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. You're asking me to marry you for money in a hospital room while my daughter is dying." Patricia's voice cracked. "I'm asking you to let me help the little girl who taught me how to make tea in a horse cup and told me my eyes look sad. I'm asking you to let me be part of this, because I already am, James. I've been part of this since the moment Rachel drew that picture of me and called me the pretty sad lady. I just didn't know it yet." James sat back down. He put his head in his hands. Patricia waited. 24 days earlier, she would have pushed. She would have argued, negotiated, applied pressure until she got what she wanted. 3 weeks on a Vermont farm had taught her something her MBA never could. Some things can't be forced. Some things have to be chosen. James raised his head. "If I say yes, this isn't fake. You understand that. I won't lie to Rachel. I won't pretend for lawyers or boards or whoever the hell needs to be convinced. If we do this, we do it for real or we don't do it at all." Patricia nodded. "I know. I need to call my mother." He left the room. Patricia sat in his chair and took Rachel's hand. The little girl's pulse beat against her palm, weak but steady. Patricia thought about her own mother, dead from breast cancer when Patricia was 8. She thought about the drawings Rachel made, the way she included Patricia in them now, the 3 of them holding hands in front of a house that looked nothing like Patricia's Boston penthouse, and everything like home. James came back 15 minutes later. "My mother's on her way. She'll stay with Rachel during the surgery." Patricia stood. "And us?" "Town hall opens at 8. We can be there when the doors unlock." They didn't sleep. Brenda Williams arrived at 4 in the morning, a short woman with James's eyes and hands that had held him through his first heartbreak and his wife's funeral. She looked at Patricia for a long moment, then pulled her into a hug that smelled like lavender soap and fresh bread. "You take care of my son," Brenda whispered into Patricia's hair. "He's been alone too long." "I will." "And you," Brenda turned to James. "You let her. You hear me? You let someone love you again." James nodded. He kissed Rachel's forehead, whispered something Patricia couldn't hear, and walked out with her into the parking lot where the snow had finally stopped and the sky was starting to lighten in the east. They drove to James's farm in Patricia's rental car. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people standing on the edge of something too big for words. At the farm, James showered and dressed in his only suit, the navy one he'd worn to Diana's funeral 4 years ago. It still fit. He hadn't gained or lost weight. His body had simply stopped changing, locked in the shape of a man who'd carried his wife through 18 months of chemotherapy and now carried that loss like a stone in his chest. Patricia had clothes at the farm. She'd been staying in the guest room for 2.5 weeks, coming every weekend and then every day once Rachel's condition worsened. She chose a simple ivory dress she'd bought in town the week before. It wasn't a wedding dress. It was just a dress. But it was the first piece of clothing she'd bought in Mapleton, the first thing she'd chosen for this life instead of her old one. They arrived at Mapleton Town Hall at 7:45. The building was a small white structure with green shutters and an American flag that snapped in the wind. They sat in the car and waited. The sun came up slow and cold, turning the snow into diamonds. At 8 exactly, the door opened. Dorothy Fletcher, the town clerk, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She'd known James since he was a boy, running through the general store, stealing candy he always came back to pay for later. She looked at him standing on her doorstep in a suit with a woman she'd seen around town the past few weeks, and her face softened with understanding. "Well," Dorothy said, "it's about time." The paperwork took 11 minutes. Dorothy asked the required questions. James answered in a steady voice. Patricia's hands shook when she signed her name. They needed a witness. Dorothy called her husband Frank from the back office. He was a retired mailman who still walked the routes for exercise. He signed where Dorothy pointed and shook James's hand. "Your daddy would be proud," Frank said to James. "Diana, too." James's throat closed. He managed to nod. Dorothy read from the book, her voice formal but warm. "By the power vested in me by the state of Vermont, I now pronounce you husband and wife." She looked at James. "You may kiss your bride." James turned to Patricia. She looked terrified and hopeful and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her expensive dress or the way she'd learned to style her hair. She looked beautiful because she was there, because she'd chosen to be there, because when he'd needed someone most, she hadn't run. He kissed her. It was gentle. It was real. It tasted like salt, because she was crying. They walked out of the town hall, married. The whole thing had taken less than 30 minutes. They drove back to the hospital in silence. James's phone rang as they pulled into the parking lot. It was Dr. Martinez. "We're ready. Bring her down." Brenda met them outside the surgical wing. She hugged James, then Patricia, then James again. "I love you, baby. Both of you." They wheeled Rachel out on a gurney. She was awake, groggy from the sedatives, but aware enough to smile when she saw James. He walked beside her, holding her hand. Rachel looked at Patricia. "Are you gonna stay?" Patricia's voice broke. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." "Promise?" "I promise." They reached the surgical doors. James had to let go. Rachel's hand slipped from his, and the nurses wheeled her through the double doors into a room he couldn't follow. The doors swung shut. James stood there, staring at the place his daughter had disappeared. Patricia took his hand. He gripped it hard enough to hurt. They sat in the waiting room. 4 hours passed like 4 years. Brenda brought coffee that no one drank. Amanda Parker, Patricia's assistant, arrived at noon with James's laptop and a bag of clothes someone had packed for him. She hugged Patricia without saying anything because there was nothing to say. At 2:15, Dr. Martinez came through the doors. His scrubs were clean. His face was tired, but not devastated. James stood so fast he knocked the chair over. "She's stable," Dr. Martinez said. "The surgery was successful. The new valve is in place. Her heart is beating strong. She's going to be okay." James's legs gave out. Patricia caught him, and they sank to the floor together, holding each other, while Brenda cried and thanked God, and Amanda stood in the corner, wiping her eyes. They let James see Rachel an hour later. She was in recovery, intubated, monitors beeping steadily. James sat beside her bed and put his hand on hers, careful of the IV lines. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. He watched every breath like a miracle, because it was. Patricia stood in the doorway. She didn't intrude. This moment belonged to James and his daughter. But when James turned and saw her, he held out his hand. She crossed the room and sat beside him. They stayed there until the nurses made them leave at 8. Brenda drove them back to the farm. The house felt empty without Rachel's drawings scattered across the kitchen table, without her voice asking questions about everything from why stars twinkle to whether horses dream. James walked through the rooms like a ghost. He ended up on the porch where he'd sat with Patricia a dozen times over the past 3 weeks, talking about everything and nothing until the cold drove them inside. Patricia found him there an hour later. She'd changed into jeans and one of James's flannel shirts. It was too big on her. She sat in the chair beside him, and they looked out at the snow. "I called Richard," Patricia said. Richard Ashford was her uncle, her father's younger brother, the man who would inherit control of Ashford legacy properties if Patricia failed to meet the terms of her father's will. He'd been circling for 2 years, ever since Henry Ashford died of a heart attack at his desk while Patricia was in Dubai closing a deal she couldn't even remember now. "What did you say?" James asked. "That I got married, that he lost." "What did he say?" Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He congratulated me. Very polite, very professional. Then he said he'd see me at the next board meeting." "You think he believed you?" "I think he's going to investigate. I think he's going to look for any crack in this he can exploit. And I think he's going to find out that I married a farmer in Vermont 3 weeks after I met him, and he's going to call it fraud." James turned to look at her. "Is it?" Patricia met his eyes. "No." "Then he can investigate all he wants." They sat in silence. The temperature dropped. Patricia pulled the flannel shirt tighter around her shoulders. It smelled like wood smoke and soap and James. She'd worn $1,000 blouses that didn't feel half as good. "I need to tell you something," James said, "about Diana." Patricia waited. James had mentioned his wife exactly 3 times in 3 weeks. Once to explain why he lived on the farm. Once to tell Patricia that Rachel had her mother's eyes. Once to say that Diana had planted the purple wildflowers that still came back every spring without anyone tending them. "We met at MIT, James began. "I was studying structural engineering. She was in architecture. We had one class together, design theory, and I thought she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen, not just physically. The way she thought, the way she saw buildings as living things that breathed and grew and died." He paused. Patricia didn't interrupt. "We got married the week after graduation. Moved to Boston. I got a job at Hendricks and Shaw, one of the top firms in the country. Diana started her own practice. Small projects at first, residential mostly, but she was good, really good. She was starting to get noticed. The wind picked up. Snow fell from the porch roof in clumps. Then she got sick. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. The doctors gave her 18 months, maybe 2 years, with aggressive treatment. I quit my job the next day. Diana said I was being stupid, throwing away my career, but I didn't care. I'd spent 6 years working 80-hour weeks, missing dinners, canceling vacations. I wasn't going to miss the last year of her life for a job." His voice didn't break. It just went flat, the way voices do when the grief is old and deep and permanent. "We moved to the farm. This was Diana's family place. Her grandparents built it. She grew up here. She wanted to die here. So we came. I took care of her, chemo, radiation, clinical trials that didn't work. I held her hair when she threw up. I changed her bandages. I slept in a chair beside her bed because she was afraid of dying alone in the dark." Patricia's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Crying felt like intruding. "She lasted 16 months. At the end she couldn't get out of bed, couldn't feed herself. She weighed 87 pounds. But she was still Diana, still making jokes, still telling me I was an idiot for giving up my career. The night she died, she made me promise something." James looked at Patricia. "She made me promise I'd love again. She said Rachel deserved to grow up seeing what love looked like, not just what loss looked like. She said I deserved to be happy again. I told her I would. I lied. I didn't think I could." Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. "What changed?" "You did. Rachel drew that picture of you 3 weeks ago, the one she called the sad pretty lady, and I realized she was drawing someone who understood what we'd lost, someone who'd lost things too, and then you came back, and you didn't try to fix us or save us. You just sat with us. You drank terrible tea from a horse cup. You let Rachel teach you things. You burned spaghetti and laughed about it instead of being embarrassed. You were just there, and that's all I needed." Patricia reached for his hand. He let her take it. "I'm not Diana," Patricia said. "I know. I don't want you to be. I'm going to mess this up. I don't know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be a person outside of a boardroom. You made Rachel laugh. You sang her to sleep when she had nightmares. You sat with her for 4 hours yesterday while she drew pictures and told you about every horse she wants to own when she grows up. You already know how." Patricia leaned her head on his shoulder. James put his arm around her. They sat like that until the cold forced them inside. The next morning, James's phone rang at 6. It was Dr. Martinez. Rachel was awake. She was asking for her daddy. They drove to the hospital through empty streets. The sun wasn't up yet. The world was still and gray. Rachel was sitting up in bed when they arrived, the intubation tube gone, her voice scratchy but strong. "Daddy?" She reached for him, and James picked her up, careful of the monitors and IV lines, and held her against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he felt her heartbeat against his ribs, strong and steady and alive. Patricia stood in the doorway. Rachel saw her over James's shoulder. "Mama, Patricia!" The words hit like lightning. Patricia froze. "Mama Patricia, not Miss Patricia, not the sad lady. Mama." James set Rachel back on the bed. Rachel held out her hand, and Patricia crossed the room and took it. "Are you my mama now?" Rachel asked. Patricia looked at James. He nodded. Patricia looked back at Rachel, this little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's courage. "If you want me to be." "I want 2 mamas, one in heaven and one here. Is that okay?" Patricia couldn't speak. She just nodded. Rachel smiled, showing the gap where her front tooth used to be. "Good, because I already drew a picture of all of us. You, me, Daddy, and Mama Diana watching from the clouds. We're a family now." James wiped his eyes. Patricia kissed Rachel's forehead. They stayed at the hospital for 3 days. Rachel's recovery was textbook perfect. Her new valve worked flawlessly. Her heart was stronger than it had been in 2 years. Dr. Martinez kept saying it was miraculous, but James knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was medicine and money, and the fact that Patricia had said yes when every instinct probably told her to run. On the 4th day, they brought Rachel home. Brenda had cleaned the house and filled the refrigerator and made sure Rachel's room was warm and ready. She'd even hung the new drawing Rachel had made in the hospital, the one with 4 people and an angel. Rachel fell asleep in her own bed for the first time in a week. James and Patricia stood in the doorway watching her breathe. "We need to talk about what happens next," Patricia said. James nodded. They went downstairs. Patricia made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Rachel had taught Patricia how to make tea, where they'd eaten burned spaghetti and laughed until their sides hurt. "Richard is going to challenge this," Patricia said. "He's going to say the marriage is fraudulent, that we did it for the company. He's probably already hiring investigators." "Let him," James said. "We got married for Rachel, not for your company. That's the truth." "The truth doesn't always matter in court." "Then we'll deal with it when it comes." Patricia studied him across the table. 3 weeks ago, she'd thought she had him figured out. Simple farmer, widower, someone who'd checked out of the world and could be bought with enough money. She'd been spectacularly wrong. James Williams hadn't checked out. He'd just stopped pretending to care about things that didn't matter, and he protected what did matter with a ferocity that was terrifying and beautiful. "I have to go back to Boston tomorrow," Patricia said, Board meeting on Thursday. Richard will be there. I need to announce the marriage officially. Introduce you if you'll come." James shook his head. "Rachel just got out of surgery. I'm not leaving her." "I understand. But I need you to understand something too. I married you, not because of Rachel's surgery, not because of your company. I married you because in 3 weeks you became part of this family. And I don't know what that looks like going forward. I don't know if you stay here or I move to Boston or we figure out something in between, but I know I'm not doing this halfway. So if you want out, if this got too real too fast, tell me now." Patricia reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Even when it gets hard. Especially when it gets hard." They sat there as the sun came up and turned the kitchen gold. Upstairs, Rachel slept. Outside, the purple wildflowers Diana had planted pushed through the snow, stubborn and faithful, proof that some things survive winter. Patricia drove back to Boston the next morning. James stood on the porch and watched her rental car disappear down the dirt road. Rachel was beside him, wrapped in a blanket, her hand in his. "Is Mama Patricia coming back?" Rachel asked. James looked down at his daughter, this fierce little person who'd survived 2 heart surgeries and losing her mother and still found room in her world to love a stranger in expensive heels who didn't know how to feed horses. "Yes," James said. "She's coming back. Promise?" "Promise." Rachel smiled. She pointed at the purple flowers starting to bloom beside the porch. "Look, Daddy, Mama's flowers came back too." James looked at the flowers, then at the drawing in Rachel's hand, the one she'd been working on all morning. It showed a farmhouse with smoke rising from the chimney. 3 people stood in front, a man, a little girl, and a woman. Above them, rendered in purple crayon, an angel watched and smiled. Rachel had titled it in her careful, slanted handwriting, "My 2 families are one family now." James picked up his daughter and carried her inside, past the kitchen where Patricia had burned dinner and laughed, past the living room where they'd all watched movies together, past the guest room that wasn't a guest room anymore because the woman who'd slept there had become something more permanent than any contract could define. He tucked Rachel into bed for her afternoon nap. She was still weak from surgery. She fell asleep holding the drawing. James stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest, the way he'd done every night since Diana died. His phone buzzed, a text from Patricia. "Board meeting went well. Richard didn't challenge anything. Coming back Friday. Miss you both." James typed back, "We miss you too." He put the phone away and walked downstairs. The house was quiet. He made coffee and sat on the porch and looked out at the farm he'd bought with Diana's insurance money, the farm where they'd planned to grow old together before cancer rewrote the ending. He thought about the past 4 years, the weight of loss, the slow process of learning how to live with absence. He thought about Patricia showing up in heels and a business suit, offering money like money could solve anything. He thought about her coming back, learning to fit into a life she'd never imagined wanting. 3 weeks. That's all it had been. 3 weeks from stranger to wife. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt rushed and desperate and fake. It didn't. It felt like what Diana had asked for in her last conscious moment. A second chance at love. Not a replacement. Not an erasure. Just a continuation of the story in a different form with different characters, but the same theme. Family, fierce and fragile, and worth every risk. James finished his coffee as the sun moved across the sky. He had work to do, documentation to write for the engineering firm that still paid him despite his remote schedule. Horses to feed, fence to repair before winter came back with teeth, a daughter to raise, and a wife to build a life with, and a ghost to honor by doing exactly what she'd asked, loving again. He stood and walked to the barn. The cold bit through his jacket, but he didn't mind. He'd spent 4 years in cold that had nothing to do with temperature. This cold was just weather. This cold would pass. Patricia drove back to Boston Thursday afternoon with Amanda in the passenger seat going through emails on her tablet. The highway stretched gray and endless, snow piled high on both sides from plows that ran every night. Patricia's left hand rested on the steering wheel. Her wedding ring caught the light every time she changed lanes. She'd bought it herself Wednesday morning at a jewelry store in Montpelier. Simple gold band, nothing extravagant. It felt heavier than it should. Amanda didn't ask about the marriage until they hit the Massachusetts border. "So, are we telling the board you married him for love or strategy?" Patricia kept her eyes on the road. "Both. Richard's going to say it's fraud. Let him. He's going to hire investigators. He's probably already started." "I know." Amanda set the tablet down. "Patricia, I need to understand what we're walking into tomorrow. Is this marriage real or is it for the will?" Patricia changed lanes to pass a semi. "It's real. You've known him 3 weeks. I've known him long enough." Amanda studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the way her knuckles had gone white on the steering wheel. "You're in love with him." It wasn't a question. Patricia didn't answer. She didn't need to. They reached Boston at 7. The city rose up around them, all glass and steel and lights that never went dark. Patricia's penthouse was on the 42nd floor of a building she owned. Floor-to-ceiling windows, view of the harbor, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. She walked in and felt nothing. The place was beautiful and empty and had never been home. She stood at the window and looked out at the city. Her phone buzzed. Text from James. "Rachel's asking when you're coming back. I'm asking too." Patricia typed, "Board meeting tomorrow. Back Friday afternoon. Tell Rachel I miss her." James. "She wants to know if you'll bring her something from the city." Patricia smiled. "What does she want?" James. "A snow globe with a tall building in it. She says she wants to see where Mama Patricia works." Patricia felt something crack open in her chest. She texted back, "I'll find one." She spent an hour that night going through stores that were still open, looking for a snow globe with Boston skyline. She found one in a gift shop near Faneuil Hall. The buildings inside were generic but recognizable. She bought it and had it wrapped. The board meeting started at 9 Friday morning. Ashford Legacy Properties occupied 3 floors of an office tower in the financial district. The boardroom was on the top floor. 12 seats around a table made from wood reclaimed from a 19th century shipwreck. Richard Ashford sat at the far end, his silver hair perfect, his suit pressed, his expression neutral. Patricia walked in at 8:58. Amanda followed with a briefcase. They took their seats. The other board members filed in. Lawyers, investors, people who'd known Patricia's father and thought they knew what he would have wanted. At 9 exactly, Patricia called the meeting to order. "Before we begin regular business, I have an announcement. As most of you know, my father's will contained a provision requiring me to marry before my 33rd birthday. I'm pleased to inform the board that I married James Williams of Mapleton, Vermont, on Wednesday, February 19th. The marriage is legal and binding. All requirements of the will have been met." Richard leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Congratulations, Patricia. Very sudden, wasn't it?" "Love doesn't follow timelines." "Of course not. Though I'm sure the board would appreciate some details, background on Mr. Williams, how you met, the usual due diligence we'd expect for someone who's now technically family. Patricia had prepared for this. She had a file, education records showing James's MIT degree, employment history at Hendricks and Shaw, financial statements proving he wasn't marrying her for money because he'd never asked for any, medical records for Rachel with Dr. Martinez's notes about the surgery. She distributed copies around the table. James Williams is a widower and single father, former structural engineer, currently works as a technical copywriter while raising his 6-year-old daughter on a farm in Vermont. We met when I was researching rural property development and needed someone with engineering expertise. The relationship developed naturally over several weeks. It wasn't technically a lie. She had been researching him. The relationship had developed, just not the way she was implying. Richard flipped through the file. Very thorough, though I notice there's no prenuptial agreement listed here. There isn't one. Interesting choice. Your father built this company over 40 years. You're willing to expose it to potential claims from a man you've known less than a month. Patricia met his eyes. James doesn't want the company. He wants his daughter to have a mother and a future, that's all. How noble. I'm sure the board appreciates your confidence in his character. Still, given the unusual circumstances and the timing, I think it's reasonable to request an independent investigation, just to ensure everything is legitimate and above board. Several board members nodded. Patricia had expected this. I have no objection to an investigation. I'll cooperate fully. So will James. Richard smiled. Excellent. Then we're all on the same page. The rest of the meeting focused on quarterly earnings and development projects. Patricia presented reports, answered questions, functioned exactly as she'd functioned for 2 years since her father died. But something had shifted. She kept thinking about Rachel, asking for a snow globe, about James's hand shaking when the doctors wheeled his daughter into surgery, about the purple flowers pushing through snow because Diana Williams had planted them, and they remembered. The meeting ended at noon. Richard caught Patricia in the hallway. A word. They stepped into an empty conference room. Richard closed the door. I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about this. Your father's will was meant to ensure you had a stable personal life, not to give you an excuse for a convenient arrangement. Patricia's voice was ice. My marriage is none of your business. It became my business when it affected the company. And make no mistake, Patricia, this affects the company. If your marriage is fraudulent, the will's provisions are void. Control transfers to me as outlined in the secondary clause. So I'm going to investigate thoroughly. And if I find any evidence that you married this farmer as a strategic move to bypass your father's wishes, I will take you to court, and I will win. Patricia stepped closer. You do that, Richard. Investigate all you want. Talk to James. Talk to his family. Talk to the people in Mapleton who've watched us together. You won't find fraud. You'll find a widower who loved his first wife enough to give up everything for her. And who's learning to love again because his daughter needs a mother and because I showed up and refused to leave. That's not fraud. That's life. Richard's expression didn't change. We'll see. He left. Patricia stood in the empty conference room and felt rage building in her chest. Not at Richard, at herself, because he was right to question it. She had shown up with a contract and money and a plan to manipulate a stranger into solving her problem. The fact that it had become real didn't erase how it started. Amanda found her 20 minutes later, still standing there. We need to go. You said you wanted to be back in Vermont by dinner. Patricia grabbed her coat. They drove north in silence until Amanda finally asked, What did Richard say? That he's going to prove the marriage is fake. Can he? Patricia thought about James holding her on the hospital floor when Rachel's surgery ended, about the way he'd kissed her at the town hall, gentle and real and terrified, about Rachel calling her Mama Patricia like it was the most natural thing in the world. No, he can't. She got back to the farm at 6. The sun was setting, turning the snow pink and gold. Rachel was on the porch in her coat and boots, watching the driveway. When she saw Patricia's car, she started jumping up and down. James came out behind her, moving carefully because Rachel was still recovering and needed to stay calm. Patricia parked and Rachel ran to her. Patricia caught her, lifting her carefully, aware of the healing incision under her coat. "Hey, baby girl, I missed you." "Did you bring it? Did you bring the snow globe?" Patricia carried her inside where it was warm. The wrapped box sat on the passenger seat. She retrieved it and handed it to Rachel. The little girl tore through the paper with the focused intensity of a child who'd been waiting all day. She shook the globe and watched fake snow swirl around miniature skyscrapers. "That's where you work?" Rachel's eyes were wide. "That's where I work. It's so tall. Do you ever get scared up there?" Patricia sat on the couch with Rachel in her lap. "Sometimes, but not anymore." James stood in the doorway watching them. Patricia met his eyes over Rachel's head. He looked tired, relieved, like he'd been holding his breath since she left and could finally exhale. That night, after Rachel fell asleep, they sat on the porch despite the cold. Patricia told James about the board meeting, about Richard's threats, about the investigation that was coming. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What do you need from me?" "Just be yourself. Answer their questions honestly. They're going to ask about how we met, why we got married so fast, whether you knew about the will. And I tell them the truth, that you showed up offering money for a fake marriage and I said no. That you came back and we became friends. That when Rachel needed surgery and I didn't have the money, you offered to help his family. That we got married in a hospital waiting room because it was the right thing to do." Patricia nodded. "That's the truth. Then that's what I'll tell them. Richard's going to twist it. He's going to make it sound like I manipulated you, like you married me for Rachel's medical bills." James turned to look at her. "Did you manipulate me?" "No." "Did I marry you for money?" "No." "Then let him twist it however he wants. The truth is the truth." Patricia wanted to believe him, but she'd spent her whole life in boardrooms where truth was whatever you could prove, and perception mattered more than reality. Richard had resources. He had investigators who could make connections that weren't there and find patterns in coincidence. He could build a narrative that destroyed everything. James took her hand. "Stop thinking like a CEO for 5 minutes. You're not in a boardroom anymore. You're on a porch in Vermont with your husband, and your daughter is asleep upstairs dreaming about snow globes and tall buildings. This is real. Richard can't take that away." Patricia leaned against him. He put his arm around her. They sat until the cold became unbearable, and they went inside to the warmth. The investigation started the following Monday. A man named Thomas Chen showed up at the farm at 8 in the morning. He was in his 40s, professional, polite. He had a briefcase and a recording device and questions that had been carefully crafted to trap liars. James invited him in, made coffee, answered every question without hesitation. "How did you meet Patricia Ashford?" "She came to my farm with a business proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "Marriage contract. 12 months, $250,000. "Did you accept?" "No." "Why not?" "Because I'm not for sale." "But you eventually married her anyway?" "Yes." "Why the change?" "My daughter needed surgery. Patricia offered to help his family. We got married so she could." "So you married her for money?" I married her because I love her, and because Rachel needed a mother, and because she'd already become part of our family. How long have you known her? 5 weeks. That's very fast. When it's right, it's right. Chen took notes, recorded everything, photographed the house, asked to see Rachel's medical records. James provided them all. The investigator left after 2 hours. James called Patricia. Chen was here. What did you tell him? The truth. How did he react? Like he was trying to find the lie. He won't find it. Chen went to Boston next, interviewed Amanda, talked to the board members, requested Patricia's financial records for the past year, pulled phone records showing when she'd first contacted James, built a timeline that looked damning on paper. Contact initiated 4 weeks before the wedding, multiple trips to Vermont, marriage immediately following a medical emergency. Richard presented the findings at an emergency board session 2 weeks later. Patricia sat at the table and listened to her uncle systematically dismantle her marriage. The timeline is clear. Richard's voice was measured, reasonable. Patricia identified Mr. Williams as a potential candidate for a marriage of convenience. She approached him with money. He refused. She cultivated a relationship with him and his daughter over several weeks. When a medical emergency created financial pressure, she leveraged that pressure to secure the marriage she needed to meet the will's requirements. This is textbook fraud. Patricia didn't flinch. That's one interpretation. Here's another. I met a man who'd sacrificed everything for love. I was impressed. I came back because I wanted to understand what that kind of devotion looked like. I got to know him and his daughter. When his daughter needed surgery and he didn't have the money, I helped because that's what family does. We got married because we'd fallen in love. The timing was coincidental. Coincidental, Richard repeated. Your 33rd birthday was 4 days after the wedding. I'm aware. And you expect this board to believe that's coincidence? Patricia stood. She walked to the window and looked out at Boston, at the city she'd conquered and controlled and never really belonged to. I don't expect you to believe anything, Richard. I expect you to look at the evidence. James Williams didn't take money from me. He didn't ask for a prenup. He didn't negotiate terms or demand guarantees. He married me in a town hall with no photographers or witnesses beyond the clerk and her husband. His daughter calls me Mama Patricia because I read her bedtime stories and taught her how to draw buildings and held her hand while her father fell apart waiting for surgery results. That's not fraud. That's family. She turned to face the board. My father put that clause in his will because he thought I'd die alone and miserable like he did. He thought I'd choose work over everything else because that's what I'd always done. He was right to worry, but he was also right to force my hand, because that clause made me look outside this city, outside this company, outside everything I thought mattered. And I found something real. So investigate all you want. Vote me out if you think that's what my father would have wanted. But you won't find fraud. You'll just find a woman who finally figured out what her father was trying to teach her. The room was silent. Richard's face was unreadable. The vote came down to a tie. 6 board members believed Patricia. 6 believed Richard. The deciding vote fell to Marcus Webb, the oldest member of the board, a man who'd worked with Henry Ashford for 30 years. Marcus looked at Patricia. I knew your father longer than anyone in this room. I watched him build this company from one office and a dream. I also watched him die alone because you were in Dubai and couldn't get back in time. He never blamed you for that, but it broke him. Patricia's throat tightened. She didn't speak. Marcus continued. Henry told me about the marriage clause 6 months before he died. I argued against it, told him it was controlling and unfair. He said he didn't care about fair. He cared about you being happy, about you not ending up like him, brilliant and successful and utterly alone. He stood. I've seen the investigation. I've read the timeline. And yes, it looks suspicious. But I've also talked to James Williams. I called him myself last week. Spent an hour on the phone. And you know what I heard? A man who talks about his wife the way Henry used to talk about your mother before she died, with wonder, like he can't believe his luck. That's not fraud, that's love. Marcus looked around the table. My vote is to accept the marriage as legitimate and close this investigation. Patricia met the terms of the will. She's earned her position as CEO. Let her keep it. The motion passed 7-5. Richard didn't contest it. He simply gathered his papers and left the room without a word. Amanda found Patricia in her office an hour later. You won. Patricia was staring at the photograph on her desk. Her father on his 60th birthday, gray hair and sharp eyes, and a smile that never quite reached past his mouth. He'd built an empire and died at his desk alone. She'd spent 10 years trying to prove she could be just like him. No, Patricia's voice was soft. He won. My father. This is exactly what he wanted. She called James that night. Rachel answered, breathless and excited. Mama, Patricia, guess what? Daddy said we can get chickens. Patricia laughed, the sound surprising her. Chickens? Really? Yes, and I get to name them. I'm going to name one after you. I'm honored. Rachel kept talking, a stream of consciousness about chickens and eggs, and whether chickens dream about flying. Patricia listened and felt the knot in her chest that had been there for 2 years slowly unwind. James took the phone eventually. How did it go? I won. Marcus Webb voted in my favor. Richard can't challenge it. That's good. Is it? Because now I have to figure out what comes next. I can't keep driving back and forth every week. Rachel needs stability. You need stability. And I need to run a company. James was quiet. Patricia could hear him breathing, could picture him on the porch in the cold, thinking through angles the way he used to think through structural problems when he was an engineer. What if you didn't have to choose? His voice was careful. What do you mean? You said the company has regional offices, including one in Burlington, Vermont, an hour and a half from the farm. James, I'm not saying you give up Boston. I'm saying maybe you don't have to live there. Maybe you split time, run things from Burlington when you can, go to Boston when you have to. It's not perfect, but it's something. Patricia thought about her penthouse, empty and expensive and cold. She thought about the farm, cramped and drafty, and full of Rachel's drawings and James's quiet strength and purple flowers that remembered Diana. I'll talk to the board, she heard herself say. The board approved a hybrid arrangement. Patricia would maintain an office in Boston, but work primarily from Burlington. Amanda would handle day-to-day operations in the city. Patricia would come in for major meetings and decisions that required her physical presence. It wasn't ideal. It meant longer hours and more travel and constant juggling. But it was possible. She moved most of her things to Vermont over the next month. Clothes, laptop, the photograph of her father. She kept the penthouse because selling it felt too final, too much like admitting she was never going back. But she didn't sleep there anymore. She slept in the farmhouse in a bed James had built himself, under quilts Diana had stitched during chemotherapy when she needed something to do with her hands. Patricia would lie awake sometimes, acutely aware that she was sleeping in a dead woman's house, raising a dead woman's daughter, loving a dead woman's husband. She asked James about it one night in early April. Spring was fighting its way through winter. The purple flowers were blooming again, stubborn and faithful. "Does it bother you that I'm here, in her house?" James was reading next to her, technical manual for a project he was consulting on. He set the book down. "Diana's gone. This isn't her house anymore, it's ours. But her things are still here, her pictures, her flowers. Rachel talks about her every day. And she should. Diana's her mother. Nothing changes that." Patricia pulled the quilt higher. "I don't want to replace her." "You're not replacing her. You're continuing what she started. Loving Rachel, taking care of this family. Diana would be grateful." "How do you know?" James turned off the light. The room went dark except for moonlight through the window. "Because she told me, the night she died. She said, 'Find someone who loves Rachel as much as I do. Find someone who'll help you be the father you're meant to be. Find someone and don't let her go. I found you. I'm not letting you go.'" Patricia felt tears on her face. James pulled her close. She buried her face in his shoulder and cried for Diana, who'd loved so fiercely she planned for her own absence, and for Henry, who'd loved enough to force his daughter toward happiness, and for herself, who'd spent 32 years thinking love was weakness when it was actually the only thing that mattered. Rachel turned 7 in May. They threw a party at the farm. Brenda came with homemade cake. Amanda drove up from Boston with presents. Half the town showed up because Mapleton was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and celebrated together. Rachel wore a purple dress because purple was her favorite color, the color of her mother's flowers and her mother's eyes and the crayon she used to draw angels. She blew out 7 candles and made a wish she wouldn't tell anyone except to whisper in Patricia's ear later, "I wished for baby brother or sister. Don't tell Daddy." Patricia's heart stopped. "A baby?" "Yeah, then we'd be a real big family." Patricia didn't know what to say. She and James hadn't discussed children, hadn't discussed much beyond getting through each day and making it work and learning how to blend their lives into something functional. That night, after Rachel fell asleep and the guests went home, Patricia sat James down. "Rachel told me her birthday wish." "Let me guess, a pony." "A sibling." James went very still. "Oh, yeah." They sat in silence. The house creaked around them, old wood settling, wind in the eaves. Finally James spoke. "What do you think?" Patricia chose her words carefully. "I think Rachel's 7 and doesn't understand what she's asking for. I think we've been married 3 months and still figuring out how this works. I think I'm 33 and running a company and barely keeping my head above water most days." "That's a lot of thinking. What do you think?" James looked at his hands. "I think Diana and I wanted more kid. We were going to try after her practice got established. Then she got sick, and we ran out of time. I think I'd love to have another child. But I also think it's not fair to ask you to have a baby when you didn't sign up for this life in the first place. I signed up when I married you. You signed up to help Rachel, not to have my children." Patricia stood and walked to the window. The purple flowers glowed in the moonlight. She thought about her mother, dead at 35, barely older than Patricia was now. She thought about Diana, dying at 31 with so many plans unfinished. She thought about Rachel's wish, and the way the little girl had whispered it like a secret, like something precious and fragile that might break if spoken too loud. "I don't know if I want children." Patricia turned to face James. "I never thought about it before. My whole life was the company. And now my whole life is you and Rachel and trying to hold everything together. I don't know if there's room for more." James nodded. "Then we don't. Rachel will be fine. She's got us. That's enough." But Patricia couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, she watched James with Rachel, the way he checked her pulse every night, the way he made her laugh, the way he'd given up everything to be her father and never once seemed to regret it. She thought about what kind of father he'd be to another child, what kind of mother she might be if she tried. In June, Richard Ashford requested another meeting, private this time, just the two of them. Patricia agreed to meet him at a restaurant in Boston, neutral ground, witnesses around. Richard arrived exactly on time. He ordered scotch. Patricia ordered water. They sat across from each other like opponents in a chess match. Neither could afford to lose. "I'm not here to fight," Richard began. "I'm here to concede." Patricia waited. "I had you investigated for 3 months. Chen talked to everyone in Mapleton. Your neighbors, Rachel's doctors, the town clerk, even the mailman. You want to know what he found?" "I'm sure you're going to tell me." "He found a marriage, a real one. James talks about you the way men talk about wives they're crazy about. Rachel draws pictures of you with her and James, and some angel she says is her first mother. The people in town treat you like you belong there. Chen couldn't find a single person who thought the marriage was fake." Richard took a drink. "I was wrong about you. I thought you were like me, ambitious, cold, willing to do whatever it took to win. But you're like your father. He would have done the same thing, found a way to meet the letter of the will while actually becoming the person the will wanted you to be." Patricia didn't trust this. "What do you want, Richard?" "To apologize and to step down from the board. I'm 60 years old. I've spent the last 2 years fighting my niece for a company I don't even want to run. I'm tired. I'm going to retire, move to Florida, play golf, let you do what Henry raised you to do." He slid an envelope across the table. "My resignation, effective immediately. I've already talked to the board. They're accepting it." Patricia opened the envelope. The letter was typed and signed and legally binding. "Why now?" "Because Chen's final report included something I didn't expect. He talked to your husband for 3 hours. James told him about Diana, about giving up his career, about losing her, about meeting you and thinking he'd never feel anything again. But then Rachel drew that picture and everything changed. Chen asked him if he thought Diana would approve of you. Want to know what James said?" Patricia's throat was tight. "What?" "He said Diana would love you because you love Rachel the same way she did, fiercely, without reservation, like she's the most important thing in the world." And then he cried. A 40-year-old man cried, talking about his dead wife to an investigator, trying to prove his marriage was fraud. That's when I knew I'd lost, because you can't fake that. You can't manufacture that kind of grief and love existing in the same space. Richard stood. "Congratulations, Patricia. You won. Not because you're smarter than me or more ruthless. You won because you found something real in the middle of trying to fake it. That's rare. Don't screw it up." He left. Patricia sat alone at the table and read the resignation letter 3 times. She called James. Richard resigned. That's good. He apologized. Also good. James, I want to have a baby. Silence on the other end. Then, say that again. I want to have a baby. With you. Not for Rachel. Not because I think I should. Because I want to. Because I want to build something with you that's ours from the beginning. Because I think you'd be an incredible father, and I want to see what kind of mother I could be if I actually tried. More silence. Patricia could hear him breathing, could picture him standing wherever he was, processing. When did you decide this? Just now, sitting in a restaurant, listening to your uncle tell me that you cried talking about me and Diana in the same sentence. I want that. I want to be part of your story, not just the epilogue, part of the whole thing. Patricia, I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring this out. But I'm 33 and you're 35 and Rachel's 7, and if we're going to do this, we should do it now while we still can. James was quiet for so long, Patricia thought the call had dropped. Then, okay, yeah, okay, let's have a baby. Patricia laughed, the sound startling other diners. Just like that? Just like that. Come home. We'll talk about it properly, face to face, like married people do. Patricia paid for the water she hadn't drunk and drove north. The sun was setting, turning the highway gold. She called Amanda. I need you to clear my schedule for the next month. Why? Personal reasons. Patricia, I'm going to have a baby, Amanda. And before I do that, I need to actually be present for the family I already have. So clear the schedule. Delegate everything that can be delegated. I'll handle emergencies remotely, but otherwise, I'm taking time. Amanda was silent. Then, congratulations. Patricia got home at midnight. The house was dark, except for the porch light James always left on for her. She walked in quietly, expecting everyone to be asleep. Instead, she found James and Rachel at the kitchen table. Rachel was in her pajamas, working on a drawing. James had the baby monitor, even though Rachel was too old for it now, habit from years of checking her breathing. Rachel looked up. Mama, Patricia, you're home. Patricia kissed the top of her head. What are you doing up so late? Making you a present, but you can't look yet. James stood and pulled Patricia into a hug that smelled like coffee and wood smoke and home. We need to talk. They put Rachel to bed together, read her a story about a princess who learned to fly, tucked her in with the stuffed horse she'd had since she was 2, checked her pulse, even though the new valve made it strong and steady. Downstairs, James made tea. They sat on the couch, the same couch where Patricia had held Rachel after nightmares, where they'd watched movies as a family, where James had told her about Diana. Are you sure about this? James's voice was careful. Having a baby is huge. It changes everything. Everything's already changed. I went from CEO, who lived alone, to wife and mother in 3 months. Adding another kid doesn't seem that much more dramatic. It's different when it's yours from the beginning. The sleepless nights, the diapers, the constant worry. Patricia took his hand. I know, and I'm terrified, but I'm also sure. I want this. Do you? James pulled her close. Yeah, I do. I really do. They sat together as the night deepened and the house settled around them. Outside, the purple flowers bloomed in the dark, invisible but present, proof that some things survive everything. Patricia found out she was pregnant in September, 4 months after the conversation in the restaurant. She took the test alone in the bathroom at 6 in the morning while James was outside feeding the horses and Rachel was still asleep. 2 lines appeared, stark and undeniable. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at the plastic stick until her hands stopped shaking. She told James that night after Rachel went to bed. They were washing dishes together, a routine they would fallen into, where he washed and she dried, and they talked about nothing important. Patricia set down the towel. I'm pregnant. James's hands went still in the soapy water. He turned to look at her, suds dripping onto the floor. You're sure? 3 tests, all positive. He dried his hands on his jeans and pulled her into a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. When he set her down, his eyes were wet. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. They told Rachel the next morning over pancakes. She looked up from drowning her breakfast in syrup. What kind of baby? James blinked. What do you mean, what kind? Boy or girl? We don't know yet, sweetheart. It's too early. Rachel considered this, chewing thoughtfully. Can I pick the name? Patricia laughed. We'll talk about names together. Okay, but if it's a girl, I want to name her Diana, after my first mama. The kitchen went quiet. James's throat worked, but no sound came out. Patricia reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. That's a beautiful idea, baby girl. And if it's a boy, Henry, after Grandpa Henry that I never met, but Mama Patricia shows me pictures of. Patricia felt something crack open in her chest, the last wall she'd been holding against this family, against this life, against the terrifying vulnerability of loving people who could be lost. Those are perfect names. Rachel went back to her pancakes, satisfied. James got up and left the kitchen. Patricia found him on the porch 10 minutes later, staring out at the fields where the last of summer was fading into autumn gold. You okay? She stood beside him, not touching, giving him space. Diana and I picked out names once. After we got married, we had a list. Diana for a girl was at the top. We never got to use it. Patricia waited. And now my daughter wants to name her sister after her mother, and I don't know if that's beautiful or heartbreaking or both. His voice cracked on the last word. Patricia took his hand. It's both. Everything worth having is both. The pregnancy was hard from the beginning. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Exhaustion that made thinking feel like moving through mud. Patricia tried to work from the Burlington office, but spent most of October throwing up in the bathroom and sleeping at her desk between conference calls. Amanda drove up from Boston in early November. You look like hell. Patricia was lying on the couch in her office, a trash can beside her, crackers she couldn't keep down scattered on the floor. Thanks. Very helpful. I'm serious. You need to take a leave. Delegate more. You can't run a company like this. I'm fine. You're not fine. You threw up twice during the board call this morning. I could hear you. Patricia closed her eyes. It'll get better. Second trimester is supposed to be easier. And if it's not, then I'll deal with it. Amanda sat in the chair across from the couch. Why are you doing this to yourself? You proved your point. You kept the company. Richard's gone. You can slow down. If I slow down, they'll think I'm weak. Who's they? Patricia didn't answer because she didn't know. The board, the investors, her father's ghost, the part of herself that had spent 33 years believing her worth was measured by her productivity. She went home that night and found James teaching Rachel how to make bread. Flour dusted every surface. Rachel's hands were covered in dough. They were laughing about something, their voices bright and easy in a way that made Patricia feel like an intruder in her own kitchen. James looked up. Hey, you're home early. Amanda kicked me out, said I looked like death. You do look tired. Patricia felt tears coming and hated herself for it. Pregnancy hormones made everything feel too big, too raw. She turned to leave, but James caught her hand. Rachel, go wash up. Mama Patricia and I need to talk. Rachel obeyed without argument, reading the tension in her father's voice. When she was gone, James pulled Patricia into his arms. What's wrong? I can't do this, any of this. I'm failing at work, and I'm barely here for Rachel, and I can't stop throwing up, and I don't know how to be a mother, and I'm terrified I'm going to mess up this baby the same way I'm messing up everything else. The words came out in a rush, breaking against James's shoulder. He held her tighter. You're not messing anything up. I am. Look at me. I'm a disaster. You're pregnant and running a company and raising a 7-year-old. You're allowed to struggle. I'm not allowed to struggle. I'm supposed to have it all figured out. James pulled back enough to look at her face. Says who? Your father's dead. Richard's in Florida. The only person holding you to that standard is you. Patricia wiped her eyes. I don't know how to do this differently. Then learn. Ask for help. Take the leave Amanda suggested. Let the company survive without you for a few months. Let yourself be human. The words landed like permission she hadn't known she needed. Patricia nodded against his chest and let herself cry until there was nothing left. She took the leave the next week. 3 months, maybe longer, depending on the pregnancy and delivery. Amanda would run things in Boston. The board approved it without argument, because Patricia had earned their trust over the past year by being exactly what her father had trained her to be: competent, ruthless, and unwilling to fail. November passed in a blur of nausea and exhaustion. Patricia slept 12 hours a day. Rachel would climb into bed with her sometimes, quiet and careful, just wanting to be close. James brought meals Patricia couldn't eat and sat with her while she tried and failed to keep them down. Dr. Sarah Chen, Patricia's obstetrician in Burlington, said it was normal. Some women have hyperemesis gravidarum, extreme morning sickness. It usually gets better after the first trimester. And if it doesn't, then we manage it. IV fluids if you get dehydrated, anti-nausea medication, hospitalization in severe cases. Patricia left the appointment feeling worse than when she'd arrived. James drove because she was too dizzy to be safe behind the wheel. They stopped at a diner on the way home. James ordered soup. Patricia ordered water and crackers, and managed 3 bites before her stomach rebelled. In the bathroom, leaning over the toilet, Patricia thought about Diana dying in this house, with James taking care of her every day for 18 months. She thought about what that kind of love looked like in practice: holding hair, changing sheets, staying present while someone you loved fell apart piece by piece. She came back to the table where James waited with patience that never seemed forced or resentful. I'm sorry. For what? For being useless, for making you take care of me. James reached across the table and took her hand. You're growing our child. That's not useless. That's everything. The words broke something open. Patricia cried in a diner in Burlington while James held her hand and other customers pretended not to notice. December brought snow and relief. The nausea finally eased as Patricia entered her 2nd trimester. She could eat again, sleep normally, think without her brain feeling wrapped in cotton. She started working a few hours a day from the farm office James had set up in the spare bedroom, answering emails, reviewing contracts, staying connected without drowning. Christmas was small and perfect. Rachel made ornaments out of construction paper and glitter. James cut down a tree from their own property. Patricia bought too many presents because she'd never had a real family Christmas before, and didn't know how to do it without excess. They went to Brenda's house for dinner. She lived in a small ranch home she'd bought after James's father died 10 years ago. The walls were covered in photographs. James as a baby, James at graduation, James and Diana's wedding, Rachel at every age. There was a new frame on the mantel, James and Patricia and Rachel, from the summer, all 3 of them laughing at something the photographer had said. Brenda had labeled it in her careful handwriting, Family 2025. Patricia stood looking at it for a long time. Brenda came up beside her. You belong here. I don't know if I do. You think belonging is something you're born into. It's not. It's something you choose every day. You chose my son. You chose Rachel. You chose this life. That makes you family. Patricia helped with dishes while James and Rachel played a board game in the living room. Brenda washed, Patricia dried, just like with James. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Did you ever resent Diana? For dying? For leaving James alone?" Brenda's hands stilled in the water. "Every single day."
I watched my son give up everything to take care of her, and then she died anyway and left him broken. I was furious at cancer, at God, at her for not fighting harder, even though I knew that was unfair. How did you get past it? I didn't. I just learned to carry it alongside the love. Diana was a good woman. She loved my son. She gave me Rachel, but she's gone, and you're here, and I choose to be grateful for what is instead of angry about what was. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When Patricia went back to the living room, Rachel was asleep on the couch, her head in James's lap. He was reading a book with one hand and stroking her hair with the other, the same way Patricia had seen him do 100 times. They drove home through snow that fell soft and constant. Rachel woke up long enough to stumble into the house and straight to bed. James carried her the last few steps, tucked her in, checked her pulse out of habit, even though her heart was strong now. In their own room, Patricia undressed slowly, her body changing in ways that still surprised her. Small belly beginning to show, breasts tender and heavy. James came up behind her and put his hands on her stomach. "Can you feel anything yet?" "Not yet. Another few weeks probably." Diana felt movement at 16 weeks with Rachel. She said it felt like bubbles popping. Patricia turned in his arms. "Tell me about her, about being pregnant with Rachel." "Why?" "Because I want to know. Because this baby is Rachel's sibling, and I want to understand what that means." James led her to the bed. They lay down facing each other, his hand still on her stomach. Diana was terrified the whole time. She kept thinking something would go wrong. Every doctor's appointment, every test, she was convinced they'd find a problem. When Rachel was born healthy, Diana cried for an hour straight from relief. Was she a good mother? The best, patient, creative. She made up songs about everything. Rachel's bath song, dinner song, bedtime song. She could turn any moment into something magical. Patricia felt inadequate in ways she couldn't articulate. "I don't know how to do that. Make things magical. I barely know how to make things functional." "You made Rachel feel safe enough to call you Mama. That's pretty magical." "That was different. She needed a mother, and I was there." James propped himself up on one elbow. "You were there. You stayed. When it was hard and messy and nothing like the life you'd planned, you stayed. That's what love is. Not magic, just staying." Patricia pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like snow and certainty and the future neither of them had expected to want. The phone rang at 3 in the morning on New Year's Day. James answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello?" Patricia heard him go rigid beside her. "When? How bad?" "We'll be there in 20. He hung up and turned on the light. "That was the hospital. My mother had a stroke." "We need to go now." They threw on clothes, woke Rachel, drove through empty streets to Mapleton Regional Hospital, where Brenda had been taken by ambulance an hour ago. The ER doctor was young and tired and trying to be gentle. She had a hemorrhagic stroke, bleeding in the brain. "We've stabilized her, but the next 24 hours are critical." James's face went blank, the same expression he'd worn when they wheeled Rachel into surgery. "Can I see her?" "She's unconscious, but yes." Brenda looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped steadily.
Her silver hair was matted against the pillow. One side of her face drooped slightly. James took her hand and sat in the chair beside the bed without speaking. Patricia stood in the doorway with Rachel pressed against her side. The little girl was crying quietly. "Is Grandma gonna die?" "I don't know, baby." "Like Mama Diana?" Patricia knelt down to eye level. "The doctors are doing everything they can. We just have to wait and hope." Rachel wiped her eyes. "Can I tell her goodbye, just in case?" Patricia's throat closed. She looked at James. He nodded. Rachel approached the bed carefully. She took Brenda's free hand. "Hi, Grandma. It's me. Rachel, Daddy says you might not wake up, but I wanted you to know I love you, and that I'm going to take care of Daddy and Mama Patricia just like you taught me, and that when the baby comes, I'm going to tell them all about you and how you make the best bread and give the best hugs and always know when someone needs to hear that they're doing okay even when they think they're failing." James broke. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Patricia went to him and held his head against her stomach, where their baby was growing, this child who would never know Brenda if the worst happened. The worst didn't happen. Brenda woke up 30 hours later, confused and weak, but alive. The left side of her body wasn't working right. She couldn't move her arm. Her leg dragged when she tried to walk. Her speech was slurred, but understandable. The doctors said it would take months of physical therapy. She'd need help at home. Probably wouldn't be able to live independently again. James didn't hesitate. "She'll move in with us." Patricia nodded. "We have the space." They converted the downstairs office into a bedroom. Hired a physical therapist who came 3 times a week. James built a ramp for the front porch and installed grab bars in the bathroom. Patricia coordinated care schedules and medical appointments and insurance claims, while simultaneously being pregnant and trying to stay connected to a company that was learning to function without her. Brenda hated every minute of being dependent. She'd spent her whole life taking care of others and now couldn't dress herself or cut her own food. Patricia would find her crying sometimes, frustrated tears that came from losing autonomy more than physical pain. "I'm useless." Brenda's words were thick, her mouth not quite forming the shapes right. Patricia sat beside her on the bed they'd brought in from a medical supply company. "You're not useless. You're recovering. I can't even hold my great-grandbaby when it comes. Can't cook or clean or help. Just sit here like furniture. You think your value is what you can do for other people. It's not. Your value is that you're here. That's all we need." Brenda looked at her with eyes that were clear despite everything else failing. "You sound like James." "I've been learning from him." "Good. He needs someone who understands that love isn't performance. It's just presence." Patricia felt the baby move for the first time that night. Small flutters like Brenda's words, settling into her bones, taking root, changing shape of things she'd thought were solid. She told James while they were getting ready for bed, "I felt movement just now." He froze in the middle of brushing his teeth, toothpaste foam on his lips. "Yeah?" "Yeah, like bubbles. Just like you said Diana described it." James rinsed his mouth and came to her, put his hand on her belly, and waited. The baby moved again, pressing against his palm. "There. Did you feel that?" "I felt it." They stood together in their bathroom with its outdated tiles and leaky faucet, feeling their child announce its existence in the smallest, most ordinary miracle. February arrived with bitter cold. Patricia was 6 months pregnant now, belly unmistakable, moving through the world differently. She tired easily. Her back ached. Sleep was uncomfortable no matter what position she tried. But the baby was healthy, strong heartbeat, normal measurements. Dr. Chen said everything was progressing perfectly. Rachel talked to the baby constantly. would press her face against Patricia's stomach and tell elaborate stories about horses and dragons and princesses who saved themselves. She'd started sleeping with her hand on Patricia's belly, wanting to feel her sibling move. One night, she asked the question Patricia had been dreading. "When the baby comes, are you still going to love me the same?" They were reading together in Rachel's bed, a chapter book about a girl who could talk to animals. Patricia set the book down. "Come here." Rachel climbed into her lap, careful of the belly. Patricia wrapped her arms around her. "Listen to me very carefully. You are my daughter, not because I gave birth to you, because I chose you and you chose me. That doesn't change when the baby comes. Nothing changes except we get one more person to love. You understand? But babies need lots of attention. They do. And sometimes I might be tired or busy with the baby, but that doesn't mean I love you less.
It just means I'm splitting my attention, and you know what? You're going to help. You're going to be the best big sister. You're going to teach the baby everything you know." Rachel thought about this. Can I teach them about Mama Diana? Patricia's eyes burned. I hope you do. I hope you tell them every story you remember. Even the sad ones? Especially the sad ones. Because the sad ones show how much she loved you, how much she wanted you to be okay, even when she couldn't stay. Rachel burrowed deeper into Patricia's arms. "I love you, Mama Patricia. I love you too, baby girl. So much it scares me sometimes." They finished the chapter. Patricia tucked Rachel in and checked her pulse like James did, a habit she'd picked up without realizing. Strong and steady, evidence of survival and good surgery and luck that held. In March, Patricia got a call from Amanda. "We have a problem." Patricia was at the kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing quarterly reports while Brenda worked on physical therapy exercises in the living room. "What kind of problem?" "Marcus Webb died. Heart attack. He was at his desk going through contracts." Patricia felt the room tilt. "When?" "Last night. The funeral is Friday in Boston. The board wants you there." Marcus Webb, who'd voted in her favor when Richard challenged the marriage. Marcus Webb, who'd known her father for 30 years and understood what the will really meant. Marcus Webb, whose voice had carried weight when Patricia needed it most. "I'll be there." She drove to Boston Thursday night and stayed in the penthouse that still technically belonged to her but felt like a museum of someone else's life. The furniture was exactly as she'd left it. The refrigerator was empty. The view was spectacular and meaningless. The funeral was at a Catholic church in Beacon Hill. Hundreds of people came. Business leaders, politicians, family members Patricia had never met. She sat in the back and listened to eulogies that painted Marcus as brilliant and ruthless and kind when it mattered. After the service, Marcus's daughter found Patricia in the crowd. "He talked about you, you know, in the last few months. Said you reminded him of your father, but with more heart. Said Henry would have been proud of how you turned out." Patricia didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. The daughter handed her an envelope. "He wanted you to have this. Said to give it to you when the time was right. I figured today was right." Patricia opened it in her car after the reception. Inside was a letter in Marcus's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. "Patricia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Hopefully at my desk like your father, because going out, doing what you love, isn't the worst way to exit. I wanted you to know something I never said while alive, because it seemed presumptuous, and you had enough people telling you what to think. Your father's will wasn't about control. It was about permission. Permission to be human. Permission to want things beyond quarterly earnings.
permission to fail at something without it defining you. You took that permission and built a family from scratch in less than a year. That takes courage. I'm not sure Henry had when he was your age. Maybe that's why he put the clause in the will. He wanted you to be braver than he was. You are. Stay that way. Marcus. Patricia sat in her car outside the church and cried for the third time in 6 months. This version of herself, that pregnancy and marriage and loss had turned into someone who felt things instead of just managing them. She drove back to Vermont that night instead of staying over, got home at 2 in the morning. The house was dark except for the porch light. She walked in quietly, but James was awake, reading in the living room chair where he could see the door. How was it? He set the book down. Hard. Marcus left me a letter about my father and permission and being brave. James pulled her down beside him. What did it say? She told him, read him the letter in its entirety. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Your father sounds like he was complicated. He was. Brilliant and cold and so focused on work, he forgot to have a life. I spent 30 years trying to be exactly like him. And now? Now I'm sitting in a farmhouse in Vermont at 2 in the morning, 7 months pregnant, with my husband who builds furniture by hand, and a daughter who isn't mine by blood, and a mother-in-law recovering from a stroke in the next room. I don't think my father would recognize this version of me. James kissed her temple. I think he'd be relieved. I think that's what the whole will was about, making you unrecognizable to the person you were. Patricia leaned into him, feeling the baby kick against her ribs, strong and insistent. Mission accomplished. April brought warmth that felt miraculous after the brutal winter. The purple flowers bloomed again, faithful as always. Brenda could walk with a cane now. Her speech was clearer. She still couldn't use her left arm, but she'd learned to adapt, doing everything one-handed with stubborn determination. Rachel turned 8. They had another party, bigger this time because word had spread through Mapleton about the family that had formed in unlikely ways, and people wanted to be part of celebrating it. Patricia was enormous now, 37 weeks pregnant and ready to be done. Her back screamed, her feet swelled. She couldn't sleep because the baby treated her ribs like a jungle gym. But Dr. Chen said everything was perfect. Baby was head down, in position, ready when she was. Rachel's birthday wish this year. I wish for the baby to come soon so I can finally meet them. The baby came 4 days later. Patricia's water broke at midnight while she was reading in bed. James called Dr. Chen while Patricia breathed through contractions that came fast and hard. They woke Rachel and drove to the hospital with Brenda in the back seat, giving encouragement between curses about construction that made James drive too slow. Labor was 18 hours. Patricia had never felt pain like this, relentless and consuming and impossible to escape. James stayed beside her the whole time, letting her break his hand, breathing with her, being the steady presence he'd learned to be through Diana's illness and Rachel's surgeries and every crisis that came before. At 6:47 p.m. on April 23rd, their son was born. 8 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy lungs, perfect APGAR scores. They placed him on Patricia's chest, and she looked down at this tiny person she'd grown and felt her entire understanding of love reorganize around him. James was crying. He's perfect. He looks like you. He has your nose. Rachel was allowed in an hour later. She approached the bed carefully, eyes huge. Is that my brother? Patricia shifted to make room. This is your brother. Come meet him. Rachel climbed up beside her and stared at the baby with wonder. He's so small. Was I that small? James nodded. Even smaller. You were 6 pounds. What's his name? Patricia and James looked at each other. They'd discussed this. Agreed. But saying it out loud felt enormous. Henry Marcus, after both grandfathers. Rachel reached out one careful finger and touched the baby's hand. He gripped it reflexively. Hi, Henry Marcus. I'm your big sister, Rachel. I'm going to teach you everything. They went home 3 days later. The house had been transformed. Brenda had somehow coordinated from her chair, directing a small army of neighbors who'd painted the nursery and assembled furniture and stocked the freezer with casseroles. The first week was a blur. Feeding every 2 hours, diaper changes that seemed constant, exhaustion that made Patricia understand why sleep deprivation was used as torture. But there were moments too. Henry sleeping on James's chest, Rachel singing to her brother, Brenda holding him one-handed and crying because she'd thought she'd never get this chance. Patricia sent a photo to Amanda, mother and son, both of them looking tired and happy and real. Amanda texted back, "Board meeting next week. You should come. They want to see you." Patricia looked at Henry sleeping in his bassinet, at Rachel doing homework at the kitchen table, at James making dinner, while Brenda gave instructions from her chair, at this life she'd built from desperation and convenience and luck that had somehow become the only thing that mattered. She texted back, "I'm not coming back." Her phone rang immediately. "What do you mean you're not coming back?" Patricia walked onto the porch where she could talk without waking the baby. "I mean, I'm done, Amanda. I'm resigning." "You can't resign. You're the CEO." "I can, and I am. I'll stay on the board, consult on major decisions, but the day-to-day, I'm done. Find someone else." "Patricia, my father built that company because he had nothing else. I have everything else. I have a husband who builds me furniture and checks our daughter's pulse every night because he's terrified of loss. I have a daughter who teaches her baby brother about his grandmother in heaven. I have a mother-in-law who survived a stroke through sheer stubbornness. I have a son who's 5 days old and already the most important thing I've ever made. I'm not giving that up for quarterly earnings." Amanda was quiet. Then, "Your father would kill you." "My father put a clause in his will specifically designed to force me out of the life he lived. I think he'd understand." "What do you want me to tell the board?" Patricia looked through the window at her family, at James holding Henry, while Rachel showed them something in her homework. "Tell them Henry Ashford's daughter finally learned what he was trying to teach her, that some inheritances aren't about money, they're about knowing when to let go." She hung up and went back inside, where her husband was falling asleep, standing up, and her daughter needed help with fractions, and her son needed feeding, and her mother-in-law needed her medication, and none of it was easy, but all of it was hers. James looked up when she walked in. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect." Patricia took Henry from his arms. "I just quit my job." James blinked. "You what?" "I quit." "Effective immediately. I'll consult remotely, but I'm done running things day to day." "Patricia, don't. Don't tell me I'm making a mistake, or that I'll regret it. I won't. This is where I'm supposed to be, right here, with all of you." James pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. "Okay. Just okay. Just okay. If this is what you want, then this is what we do." Rachel looked up from her homework. "Does this mean you're staying home now?" "It means I'm staying home now." "Good. Henry needs you. We all do." Patricia sat at the table with her son in her arms and her daughter beside her, and her husband making dinner, and felt the last piece of her father's will click into place. Not the legal requirements or the marriage clause or the company succession. the real inheritance, permission to choose what mattered and let everything else fall away.